back steps of First Baptist Church of Harlan, Kentucky looked like nothing worth remembering. Gray concrete, a side lot where crabgrass had lost its war against winter. A single crow perched on a fence post that tilted 11 degrees toward the road. The particular emptiness of a hollow town in early March when the cold has stopped being dramatic and settled into something duller and more permanent. A sky the color of old dishwater, the smell of wet stone and coal smoke, and the faint sweetness of rot from the creek bed behind the church parking lot. But on that back step at 3:41 on a Saturday afternoon sat a 5-year-old girl in sock feet. One yellow sock, one white, because she had dressed in the dark, a pink hoodie with a missing zipper pull, a scrape on her right knee that had dried to rust-colored lines in the shape of a map to know where anyone would want to go. Brown eyes that did not belong to a 5-year-old, not because they were old, because they were decided. Her name was Lily Mercer, and she had given her shoes to her twin sister before her sister walked 4 blocks alone through 39-degree air to sit on this step. 11 days of one meal a day. A bedroom with a deadbolt on the outside and a window nailed shut with 2 penny nails driven at angles through the frame. 3 times Lily had tried to make someone hear her. 3 times the adults had chosen the easier explanation. So she wrote it down. 7 words in brown crayon on the back of a coloring book page. 1 misspelling that would prove beyond any doubt that a child had written them. She folded the paper twice, walked to the back door of the food pantry, and slid it under. The man on the other side had never expected to find anything on that floor except dust. Garrett Holden was on one knee inside the First Baptist food pantry, setting down the second of 2 cardboard boxes when the paper appeared. It slid under the gap in the back door with barely any sound. Just the whisper of folded coloring book paper crossing a concrete threshold, and it came to rest against the toe of his work boot. He had been making this donation run for 11 years. 3rd Saturday of every month. 2 boxes of canned goods and $400 cash dropped at the food pantry back door while the congregation was still inside for afternoon service. He never stayed. He did not want recognition. He did not want conversation. He wanted to leave the boxes and go, and for 11 years, that was exactly what he had done. But this Saturday, he did not leave. He looked at the paper, reached down, picked it up, unfolded it. He was a big man, 6 feet, even 216 pounds, hands permanently stained with machine oil from 16 years of running the only small engine repair shop in the county. He reached into his vest pocket for his reading glasses. Put them on. Read the note once. Help us, we're hungry. He read it again. The coloring book page had a horse on the front, half finished, colored in long strokes of brown crayon that stayed mostly inside the lines. On the back, the words, capital letters uneven but deliberate. The H leaned left. The W was too wide. And the word hungry had been spelled the way a child who knows the word by ear but has never seen it written would spell it. Hungra. Not a performance. Not a game. A child who was hungry had written the word the only way she knew how. Garrett stood up very slowly and opened the door. The girl standing 3 feet back was small and cold and ready to run. He could see it in the angle of her weight shifted slightly toward her back foot the way a rabbit sits at the edge of a field. She had positioned herself with a clear line to the corner of the building. If he moved wrong, she would be gone before he finished his first step. She looked at his hands first. The oil stains, the calluses, the tattoo on his right forearm that had faded to blue-green over 2 decades. The reading glasses. Then she looked at his face. She did not run. Are you the one who wrote this? Garrett said. She nodded. Then before he could ask another question, she said the sentence that would tell him everything he needed to know about who Lily Mercer was at 5 years old. Rose is on the back step. She doesn't have shoes. Not hello. Not I'm scared. Not help me. She told him about her sister first. Garrett stepped outside and looked right. Rose Mercer was sitting on the concrete step at the corner of the building, knees pulled to her chest, wearing a purple sweater, 2 sizes too large, and a pair of socks on bare feet. She had not looked up. She was very still in the particular way of a child who has learned that staying still keeps things from getting worse. Garrett walked to her, not fast, not slow. He did not crouch. He did not announce himself. He did not do any of the things adults do when they are trying to seem safe and end up seeming more frightening. He just walked to her, unzipped his riding jacket, and wrapped it around her shoulders before he said a word. She did not pull away. Something fell from Lily's hoodie pocket as she came up behind them. Two small rectangles of folded paper, water damaged at the corners, falling to the concrete. Garrett picked them up. Birthday cards. He could tell that much. The handwriting inside had blurred from rain or a leaking roof, but not disappeared. Lily took them from him carefully and slid them into the jacket pocket, now wrapped around her sister. "So they don't fall again," she said. Garrett looked at her for a moment. Then he held the food pantry door open and stood to the side. "You did right," he said. "Both of you come inside." The cold was 39 degrees and dropping. Rose had been on that step for 14 minutes. Garrett had he estimated about 10 minutes before her temperature became a medical problem. He did not say this out loud. He noted it the way a man notes a deadline, quietly without panic, with intention. Inside the pantry, he found a folded emergency blanket in the donation supplies and wrapped it around Rose's feet. The room smelled of canned goods and old wood and the particular dusty warmth of a room that had been holding donated food since 1987. A crow called outside. The heating unit in the corner ticked. He asked one question. "When did you last eat?" The girls looked at each other. It was Lily who answered. "Yesterday morning." Garrett's jaw tightened once. That was all. He reached into one of his donation boxes and pulled out a can of peanut butter crackers. The kind that came in orange packaging, the kind he had bought for the pantry without thinking about it, the kind that were suddenly the most important thing in either of those boxes. He opened them and set them on the shelf in front of the girls without making it a moment, without commentary, the same way you would set food in front of anyone who needed to eat. Lily watched him. Then she took two crackers. She handed one to Rose first. Garrett stood back and let them eat. He kept his face neutral, but something had gone very still inside him. The way still water looks calm from the outside and is doing everything underneath. He had been 9 years old once on the other side of a locked door, eating when it was convenient for someone else. For 3 years, nobody came. Not because nobody knew, because knowing was heavy and not knowing was easier, and the adults on the other side of the wall had made the calculation that every failing adult makes. They had assumed someone else would handle it. They had told themselves there was probably a reason. They had looked at the locked door and decided that what happened behind it was not their concern. Until a neighbor whose name Garrett had never learned finally made a call. One call, and everything that came after the shop, the chapter, the 11 years of canned goods and cash left at this pantry door, had come from that one act by a stranger who had decided that what she saw through a window was worth picking up a phone. Garrett looked at these two girls. One was someone else's shoes because she had given hers away. One who had not spoken to an adult in 11 days, but was watching him with brown eyes that missed nothing. And he understood without them having to explain exactly what kind of house they had come from. What he did not know yet was how deep it went. The pantry coordinator, a woman named June Dillard, who left the back door cracked for Garrett. Every third Saturday appeared in the doorway that connected to the church hallway. She saw the girls, saw Garrett's expression, and stopped. "June, I need 10 minutes, Garrett said, "and I need the back door locked." June looked at the girls, back at Garrett. She nodded and disappeared without a word. Lily finished her crackers and folded the wrapper into a small square, the way a careful child does when she has been taught to be tidy, even when the world around her has stopped being tidy in return. Then she looked at Garrett. "Our mama is at the county lockup," she said. "Dolores won't let her call us." Garrett set his forearms on the donation shelf and looked at her level. "How long?" 11 days. Lily said it like a number she had been counting carefully. Not guessing, keeping track. "Has anyone else tried to help you?" Something flickered across her face, not hurt exactly. The specific expression of a person who has been failed enough times to have stopped being surprised by it. A 5-year-old should not have that expression. Lily Mercer had it. "I told Mrs. Hargrove through the fence. She told Dolores. Dolores said we were dramatic." She paused. "I put a note under the neighbor's door on day 7. They slid it back." She did not say they slid it back with bitterness. She said it factually, the way you would report weather, which was somehow worse. Because here was a 5-year-old who had already learned to expect nothing, and she had written the note anyway. She had learned that hoping was dangerous and had done it 3 times. That was not naivety. That was a decision. Rose had not spoken yet. She sat with the emergency blanket around her feet and Garrett's riding jacket around her shoulders and watched her sister talk. Her brown eyes, identical to Lily's, moved between Lily and Garrett with careful attention, the way you watch two things you are not sure you can trust yet, but are willing to wait and find out. Then Rose looked directly at Garrett. She opened her mouth. The voice that came out was small and slightly rough, like a voice that had not been used in a while, like a door opening after the hinges have rusted. She won't let Mama call. We don't know where Mama is. Garrett looked at her steadily. I know where she is, he said, and she's going to know you're safe before the sun goes down. Rose looked at him for a long moment, her brown eyes watchful, calculating in the way that a child calculates when the stakes are survival. Then she nodded once and went back to watching. That was the moment. That nod. Garrett would think about it later in the weeks and months that followed, turning it over the way you turn a coin in your pocket. What it cost a 5-year-old who had not trusted an adult in 11 days to nod yes. What it meant that she had given her trust not because she was naive, but because she had weighed this man against every other adult who had failed her and decided with the full gravity of a child who has been forced to grow a decade in 11 days that this one might be different. Lily reached into the pocket of her pink hoodie. She placed something on the donation shelf beside the cracker wrapper. It was a second piece of coloring book paper, same brown crayon, same careful large letters. Garrett picked it up. His reading glasses were still on. It was a transcript, a child's phonetic reconstruction of a phone conversation written in the dark, memorized word by word, reproduced in the handwriting of someone who had understood at 5 years old that the words were important and needed to be kept. Dolores said $15.88 a month. She said she'd be a fool not to fight for it. She said Mama can visit, but Dolores controls the schedule. Donna asked, don't you feel bad for the girls? Dolores said they'll adjust, children always do. The pantry was quiet. The heating unit ticked. Outside, a car moved slowly down Church Street. Garrett read it twice. The first time to understand the words. The second time to understand the child who had written them. A 5-year-old pressed against a locked door in the dark, listening to a woman discuss the financial value of keeping her imprisoned. And instead of crying, instead of freezing, instead of doing any of the things that fear tells you to do, this child had memorized the conversation and written it down. She had understood at 5 that evidence matters, that words on paper are harder to deny than words in the air. He put the note in his vest pocket beside the first one. Then he stood up straight, pulled out his phone, and looked at the time. 3:47 p.m. He had 4 calls to make. The first call lasted 40 seconds. Hawk, it's Garrett. Dean Hawk was 53 years old. He ran the county chapter and had raised 4 children alone in these hollows while doing it. He knew every family court judge in eastern Kentucky by first name. He had been a mechanic, a trucker, a warehouse foreman, and for the past 9 years, the man who decided when the chapter moved and how. He had seen the inside of enough courtrooms, in enough kitchens, in enough back bedrooms, to know that the worst things did not happen where anyone was watching. They happened in the spaces between oversight and the gaps that good intentions left open. When Garrett finished speaking, there was a pause of about 2 seconds. How old? 5, twins, 11 days. Another pause, shorter this time. The sound of a man who has already made a decision and is only pausing to confirm the shape of it. Send me the note. Garrett photographed both pieces of coloring book paper and sent them. He heard Hawk's sharp intake of breath when they came through. The misspelling, the phonetic transcript, the brown crayon. Give me 15 minutes. The second call went to Flint. Raymond Flint, 55 years old, former Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services investigator, 18 years on the job before he quit in 2021 after a flagged case got buried by his own department. He knew which family court statute Dolores's petition violated. He knew how to file a counter motion before a Monday morning hearing. He had spent nearly 2 decades watching the system work exactly as designed and failing exactly where the design had gaps. He had left because the gap had swallowed a child and nobody wanted to talk about it. When Garrett told him about the petition to block Annie's return, Flint went quiet for exactly the kind of pause that meant he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She filed on day 3, March 14th, before the 72-hour medical check was even completed. Flint's voice was flat, the particular flatness of a man who is not surprised but is angry anyway. Garrett, this isn't impulse. She had the lawyer lined up before the girls' beds were even cold. The third call went to Steele. Dale Steele, 60 years old, retired county sheriff's deputy, 24 years of service. His first question was the one that needed asking. The mother, does she know? She doesn't know anything. Dolores has been blocking the collect calls. A long pause. The sound of boots on a hardwood floor. A door closing. I'll call the detention center. Annie Mercer will hear her daughter's voices before 5 o'clock. The fourth call was to Cutler. Frank Cutler, 52, former EMT for 16 years. Garrett told him about Rose's sock feet on the cold concrete step, about Lily's scraped knee, about 11 days of one meal a day. Cutler's voice went flat in the particular way of a medical professional controlling his response. Don't move them until I get there. By 3:58 p.m., the group text had gone out. Not from Garrett, from Hawk. 4 words and a location. Millbrook Hollow. Bring everyone. The county chapter got it first. 44 brothers. The neighboring chapters followed in quick succession. 38, 41, 33. The group text went out at 3:51 p.m. By 4:15, 112 confirmed responses. By 4:30, the number was 156, with more still rolling in from surrounding hollows and ridge roads in small towns with names that sounded like weather. Not one of them asked for details. Not one asked for proof. Hawk had made the call. Garrett had found what he found. That was enough. In Harlan, Kentucky, in the particular silence of a hollow town in early March, 156 engines turned over within the span of an hour. Back in the food pantry, Cutler arrived at 4:02 p.m. with a first aid kit and the specific expression of a man who has seen what food restriction does to a child's body and is keeping his face professional by effort of will. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders hands that could palm a basketball, and he knelt in front of Rose Mercer with the gentleness of someone handling something irreplaceable. He examined Rose's feet. Cold circulation, slower than it should be, but no permanent damage. He examined Lily's scraped knee, cleaned it without flinching, put a proper bandage on it with the practiced efficiency of 16 years of roadside medicine. He weighed them both on the pantry's old donation scale, the kind used for bulk goods. He looked at his own clipboard, looked at Garrett, said nothing. Garrett said, "Give me the number." 6 pounds each, below normal for their age. Cutler's voice was professionally flat. In 11 days. Garrett stood with that information for a moment. 6 pounds in 11 days. He did the arithmetic without wanting to. What the body does when it is not fed. How quickly a child's reserves deplete. How close they had been to something that did not have a bandage or a refeeding plan. The heating unit ticked. Somewhere on the church grounds, the crow called twice and went silent. Graves arrived 10 minutes after Cutler. Nathan Graves, 39, the chapter's documentation man. He photographed both pieces of coloring book paper under good light, made digital copies, time-stamped everything. He did not do it dramatically. He did it the way you do something that matters. Carefully and without comment. Each photograph taken twice. Each backup verified. Because evidence that matters deserves to be treated like it matters. Garrett sat down across from Lily. He had moved a folding chair to her level without making it obvious. Without the particular awkwardness of an adult trying to seem small. He just sat down and looked at her the way you look at someone you are speaking to as an equal. "I was 9 years old," he said, "and someone finally opened a door for me after 3 years of nobody opening it." Lily looked at him. Her brown eyes, which had been decided and careful since the moment he first saw her, shifted. Not to softness, to recognition. "Nobody opened yours either. Nobody opened mine either." The pantry was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not empty, but full. The kind that happens when two people recognize something in each other that does not need to be explained because they have both lived on the same side of the same locked door. "You didn't wait 3 years, Garrett said. "You wrote it down. You slid it under the door. You left your shoes for your sister." He paused. "That's the bravest thing I've seen in 48 years. Rose, who had been very still, shifted in her chair. She reached into the pocket of Garrett's jacket still draped around her and pulled out one of the rain-damaged birthday cards. She looked at it for a moment with an expression that was private and careful, the way you look at something you have protected at great cost. Then she held it toward Garrett. He took it carefully. It was a child's birthday card, the kind sold at pharmacies for $1.99. The message inside had blurred from whatever water had reached it. A hollow roof maybe, or a box left in rain, but the handwriting was still readable in places. "For my girls on their birthday. Daddy loves you too." The rest was gone, dissolved into the paper. But those words remained stubborn and faded and real. "Dolores threw them away," Lily said. "I found them in her recycling bin on day 3. Garrett looked at the blurred words. A father who had written something for his daughters. A woman who had thrown it away. A 5-year-old who had pulled it from the trash and kept it for 8 days in her hoodie pocket against her body, because some things are not garbage no matter who says they are. He looked at both girls. "Your daddy left you something," he said. And you kept it. Rose nodded. She held her hand out for the card. He returned it. She slid it back into the jacket pocket with the same care a museum curator gives to a painting. The jacket was far too large for her. She did not seem to mind. She wrapped it tighter. Dolores is filing to keep you from going back to your mama, Garrett said. He said it directly because Lily had already heard the phone call and written it down in brown crayon, and she deserved directness. She had earned it. She has a hearing in 19 days. We're going to have to stop it. Lily looked at him carefully. Measuring. Not the way a child measures with hope. The way a person who has been measuring adults for 11 days and finding them short measures. Can you do that? Flint can, Garrett said. He spent 18 years doing exactly this kind of work, and he's already on the phone. Lily considered this. She turned it over the way she turned everything over, with the seriousness of someone for whom incorrect assumptions were not abstract. They were dangerous. Dolores said the court already decided. Dolores told the court what Dolores wanted them to hear, Garrett said. The court hasn't heard from anyone else yet. He held up the 2 pieces of coloring book paper. The first note, the transcript. They're going to hear from you. Something happened in Lily's face then. Not relief, not gratitude. Something more fundamental. The expression of a person who has been shouting into a void and has just heard the void answer back. She looked at the coloring book pages in the pages she had written in brown crayon, in a dark room with a locked door, and for the first time in 11 days, the evidence of her own courage was being held by someone who understood what it was. She did not cry. She did not smile. She sat up a little straighter in her chair and said, okay. That one word, Garrett would carry it for years, not because it was dramatic, because it was the opposite. It was the word of a 5-year-old who had been carrying the weight of survival for 11 days and had just been told for the first time that someone else was going to help carry it. And instead of collapsing, instead of letting go, she had said, okay, the way a soldier says okay when reinforcements arrive. With relief, yes, but also with the steadiness of someone who is not going to stop being strong just because she no longer has to be. At 4:24 p.m., Garrett's phone lit up. He stepped to the corner of the pantry away from the girls. Steele's voice came through. Annie Mercer is on the line. Garrett brought the phone to Lily. He held it out. Lily looked at it. For the first time since she had walked around that building and slid a note under a door, her face stopped being decided. The determination, the steadiness, the particular adult gravity of a child who has been carrying something too heavy for too long, all of it fell away. And for just a moment, she was 5 years old. Mama, she said. The sound that came through the phone from the county detention center. The sound of Annie Mercer, who had called 9 times and heard nothing, who had not known for 11 days whether her daughters were eating or sleeping or safe, was not something Garrett would ever describe to anyone. Some sounds belong only to the people in them. They are not stories. They are not narrative. They are the private geography of a specific grief ending, and they do not belong to anyone who was not there. He stepped to the other side of the pantry and looked at the canned goods on the shelves while both girls pressed close to the phone. He could hear the murmur of their voices, Lily's small and steady, Rose's even smaller, 1 or 2 words at a time. And beneath both of them, the sound of a woman trying to hold herself together across a phone line from inside a building she could not leave. Garrett studied the labels on the canned goods. Green beans, corn, pinto beans. He read each one with the focus of a man who is giving 2 children the only privacy available in a church food pantry on a Saturday afternoon. He read them twice. Outside, the hollow was getting darker. The temperature was still dropping, and 156 motorcycles were moving through eastern Kentucky toward a single road. In his vest pocket, Garrett still had 2 pieces of coloring book paper with brown crayon writing on them. The misspelling that proved they were real, the transcript that proved they were evidence, and the $400 cash he had brought for the pantry, which he quietly slid beneath the donation boxes while the girls were on the phone because the pantry still needed it and because some things you do without announcing them. The crow on the fence post was gone. The light was going. And Lily Mercer, 5 years old, who had written it down and slid it under and left her shoes for her sister, was talking to her mother for the first time in 11 days. The phone call lasted 9 minutes. When it ended, Lily pressed the red button carefully the way you press something that matters and handed the phone back to Garrett. Her face had changed again. Not back to the decided expression. Something between decided and 5 years old. Something that had room for both. She didn't know, Lily said. About any of it, she didn't know. I know, Garrett said. Dolores told her we were fine. On the one call that went through, day 2, Dolores said we were eating and going to school and adjusting. Lily's voice was steady, but her hands were not. They were gripping the edge of the shelf, knuckles white, the particular grip of someone who is holding on to something, because letting go means feeling everything at once. Mama believed her. Because why wouldn't you believe the person taking care of your children? Garrett did not answer that question. There was no answer to it that would help. He just stood there and let Lily grip the shelf and let Rose lean into the jacket and let the room hold all three of them without demanding that anyone be brave about it. After a moment, Lily let go of the shelf. She flexed her fingers. She looked at Garrett with the brown eyes that had already seen too much and had decided anyway to keep looking. What happens now, she said. Now Garrett said, you stay here where it's warm. Cutler is going to check on you one more time, and I'm going to go stand on a road. Lily looked at him. The motorcycles. She had heard. Of course she had heard. She had spent 11 days listening through locked doors and memorizing what she heard. The sound of 156 engines converging on a hollow road would not have escaped her. How many? Enough, Garrett said. Lily considered this. Then she said, don't let Dolores talk her way out. It was not a request. It was an instruction delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had watched Dolores talk her way through every encounter for 11 days. Who had watched a neighbor accept the word dramatic? Who had watched a note get slid back under a door? Who had watched a postman turn away from her sister's voice? Lily Mercer, 5 years old, understood something about Dolores Whitfield that most adults would not have grasped in a year of observation. She understood that Dolores's weapon was not cruelty, it was plausibility. She understood that the most dangerous thing about the woman who had locked her in a room and fed her once a day was not the lock. It was the story Dolores told about the lock, the story that sounded reasonable, the story that made other people nod and say, well, children do sleepwalk, and she is managing 2 traumatized girls, and surely there is a reasonable explanation. She won't, Garrett said. He said it as a promise, and he meant it as one. Then he looked at June Dillard, who had reappeared in the doorway with 2 blankets and a thermos of hot chocolate, and he nodded to her once. June came in and sat down with the girls, and Garrett walked out of the food pantry into the late afternoon cold. The light was almost gone. The temperature was 37 degrees and dropping toward freezing. The sky had turned the particular shade of iron gray that meant snow was possible but not certain. The kind of sky that does not commit, that holds its weather close and lets you wonder. Garrett stood in the parking lot of First Baptist Church and listened. From the east, rising and falling with the terrain, came the sound. Low at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind coming through the gap in the ridgeline. Then deeper. Then unmistakable. The particular bass rumble of multiple engines moving in the same direction at the same speed, and the sound grew until it filled the hollow, like water fills a basin, settling into every corner, every gap, every silence. He got on his own bike. He had parked it at the far end of the lot out of habit, out of the same instinct that made him leave the donation boxes without staying. He turned the engine over, and it joined the sound that was already filling the valley. One more voice in a chorus that had grown to 156, and he rode toward Millbrook Hollow Road. The road was narrow. 2 lanes, no center line, the asphalt cracked and patched, in the way of roads that get fixed enough to function, but never enough to forget what they are. Houses on both sides, small, vinyl-sided, the particular architecture of a hollow, where people had lived for generations and would live for generations more. Porches with rocking chairs, trucks in driveways, satellite dishes angled toward the same empty sky. The bikes were already there when he arrived. Parked tight to the curb on both sides, engines off chrome, catching the last of the late afternoon light. The brothers were standing, not sitting on their bikes, not milling around, not talking. Standing in the road in 2 columns facing the direction from which Dolores Whitfield's car would come. Hawk was at the front, arms crossed. His face showed nothing except the particular patience of a man who has already made every decision that needs making and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. Garrett took his position to Hawk's left. He did not need to be told where to stand. He had been standing in this position in different formations, on different roads, for different reasons, for long enough that the place found him. The hollow was quiet. 156 men standing in a road, and the only sound was the tick of cooling engines and the distant call of that crow, still somewhere on the church grounds, still sounding off into the gray air, as if it too were keeping count. At 29 Millbrook Hollow Road, the house that belonged to Dolores Whitfield, the porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. Inside, in a back bedroom that measured 10 feet by 9, a mattress lay on the floor with one blanket. A coloring book with 4 crayons sat on the mattress. A deadbolt was mounted on the outside of the door. 2 penny nails were driven through the window frame at angles that prevented the window from opening more than 2 inches. The room was empty now. The girls who had slept there for 11 nights were in a warm food pantry eating peanut butter crackers and talking to their mother on a borrowed phone. But the room was still there. The deadbolt was still there. The nails were still there. And they would be there when the deputies arrived with the search warrant, which was being processed at that moment by a county judge who had received a phone call from a retired 24-year sheriff's deputy who knew which facts to present first. The light continued to fade. The temperature continued to drop. And 156 brothers stood in a road in eastern Kentucky waiting for a woman's car to turn the corner with the particular quiet of men who have already decided what justice looks like and are prepared to deliver it without raising a single voice. Garrett stood in the cold and thought about a locked door in a county not far from this one 39 years ago. He thought about the sound of a deadbolt turning from the outside. He thought about the particular quality of silence that a child learns when silence is the only thing that keeps things from getting worse. He thought about Lily's face when she said okay. He thought about Rose's nod. And he thought about the note, 7 words in brown crayon, one misspelling that proved it was real. The bravest thing he had seen in 48 years, written by a 5-year-old who had every reason to stop trying and had tried anyway. The crow called once more from the church grounds and went silent. The last light left the sky. And down at the far end of Millbrook Hollow Road, headlights appeared. Dolores Whitfield was coming home. Dolores Whitfield's car turned onto Millbrook Hollow Road at 5:22 p.m. She had stayed late at the church fund committee meeting because there were invoices to review a contractor payment to authorize and the particular satisfaction of being the person in the room who understood the numbers, while everyone else smiled and nodded and waited for her to tell them what the numbers meant. She had cultivated that satisfaction for 30 years. The competent one, the reliable one, the one who stayed late and did the work and could be trusted to manage whatever needed managing. She had her committee folder on the passenger seat, her reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, a takeout bag from the diner on Mound Street. She was thinking about what she would tell the girls for dinner, that she had eaten already, that there was cereal, that they could have a bowl if they were quiet about it. She did not see the motorcycles until she had already committed to the turn. They stretched in both directions down Millbrook Hollow Road, parked tight to the curb, chrome catching the last gray light. Leather jackets bearing the same insignia, and the men were not sitting. They were standing in the road, facing her car. 156 of them arranged in columns on both sides of the street with the particular discipline of people who have done this before and understand exactly how much space to leave and exactly how still to be. Dolores's foot came off the gas. The car rolled to a slow stop 2 houses short of her driveway. She sat for a moment, took off her reading glasses, put them back on. The scene did not change. The silence was the first thing, not the absence of sound because there was sound. Cooling engines ticking, a porch light clicking on 3 houses down, the wind through the gap in the ridgeline. But beneath all of that, the particular quality of silence that comes from 156 people who have chosen not to speak. Deliberate silence, unanimous silence, the kind that has weight. Hawk was at the front, arms crossed, not moving. Behind him, 4 columns of brothers. Not a protest, not a mob. A presence. The distinction mattered, and every man in that formation understood it. They had come for 2 little girls, and they had come with discipline, and they would leave with discipline, and in between they would stand in a road and be exactly what this moment required. Witnesses. Wait. The kind of presence that does not need to threaten, because its existence is the statement. Dolores did not get out of the car immediately. She sat for 47 seconds. Garrett counted. He watched her through the windshield. He could see her arranging herself, the reading glasses coming off and going back on, the committee folder being positioned, the shoulders settling into a specific posture. She was building the version of herself she intended to present before she opened the door. She stepped out with her committee folder held against her chest, reading glasses on, her expression arranged into something resembling confused inconvenience. The face of a woman who has been interrupted during a normal day and would like an explanation. She had practiced this face for 30 years in church meetings and committee hearings, in every conversation where the truth was expensive and the performance was free. "What is going on here?" she said. Measured, slightly martyred, the voice she used with people who needed managing. Hawk looked at her for a moment without speaking. His arms remained crossed. His expression did not change. He had the particular stillness of a man who has heard a great many stories in his 53 years and has learned to wait for the truth to show itself between the words. Then he said, "Where are the girls, Dolores?" A half-second pause, almost invisible. The barest interruption in the performance, like a single frame dropped from a film. Her expression held. "They're inside. I've been at a church meeting. I left them with a neighbor." She looked past him at the row of bikes, the chrome, the insignia, the columns of men who were watching her without expression. "I don't know what you think you're doing on my street, but—" "Which neighbor?" Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Excuse me, the neighbor you left 2 5-year-olds with. Which one?" Hawk did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The question was simple and specific, and it landed in the particular silence of 156 men waiting for the answer. There was nowhere for it to go except into Dolores Whitfield's carefully constructed face. Her shoulders dropped, a practiced movement, palms opening, head tilting. The specific body language of a woman who had learned that appearing reasonable gets you further than appearing defensive. She had used this posture 1,000 times. In committee meetings when someone questioned her numbers. In church when someone asked about a discrepancy. In the kitchen of 29 Millbrook Hollow Road when Brenda had asked a question that came too close. "I don't know who called you people," she said, and the word people carried exactly the weight she intended it to carry. "But I am this family's court-appointed guardian. I have documentation. Whatever you think you know." "We have the notes," Garrett said. He had been standing to Hawk's left, and Dolores had not seen him yet, or had not wanted to see him. She turned her head. Her gaze went to the 2 pieces of coloring book paper he held. Brown crayon, large letters, the horse half-colored on the back of the first page. The pantomime of confused inconvenience slipped for exactly 1 second. 1 second during which Dolores Whitfield's face showed something true. Not fear, not guilt, not remorse. Something more precise than any of those. The expression of a person who has been careful for 11 days and has just registered that the carefulness was not enough. That the careful architecture of plausibility she had constructed, the locked door, the controlled narrative, the blocked phone calls, the reasonable explanations, all of it had been undone by a 5-year-old with a brown crayon and a piece of coloring book paper. Then the expression closed back over smooth and practiced, and she said, "Those girls have vivid imaginations. They've been through a trauma. Whatever they told you—" "Dolores," Hawk's voice was flat and quiet. "Flint, walk her through it." Flint stepped forward. Raymond Flint, 55 years old, former Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services investigator, 18 years. He was not a large man, not physically imposing in the way the brothers on either side of him were. He was average height, thin through the shoulders, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular posture of a man who spends most of his time sitting at desks reading documents. But when he stepped forward, Dolores Whitfield's eyes changed. Not her expression was still performing. Her eyes. She recognized what he was. Not who, what. The particular species of person who reads filings for a living and remembers every number. He had a folder. Not a dramatic folder, not a leather briefcase or a legal binder. The plain manila kind. He opened it. "Social Security dependent payments," he said. $1,588 a month deposited March 15th. 1 full payment already received. He turned a page. "A petition to extend guardianship filed March 14th, 3 days after taking the girls, before the mandatory 72-hour medical check was completed." He turned another page. "No school enrollment in 11 days. No pediatric appointment. 1 meal per day based on the girls' reported caloric intake and a weight check performed this afternoon by a former EMT with 16 years of field experience." He looked up. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the last of the light. 6 pounds underweight each in 11 days. Dolores's committee folder was pressed very tightly to her chest. Her knuckles had gone white, though her face had not moved. She was still performing, still holding the expression of a reasonable woman being inconvenienced. But the performance was getting harder to sustain the way the held note gets harder the longer you hold it, and the strain was beginning to show in the small muscles around her eyes. The 72-hour medical requirement, Flint continued, is a county family court standing order. It is not a suggestion, it is a condition of emergency guardianship. You did not complete it. Your petition to extend guardianship was filed before you had even met that basic condition. He closed the folder, not with drama, with the quiet finality of a man who has presented evidence many times and knows that the folder closing is a punctuation mark. The family court judge in this county has been a colleague of mine for 11 years. She will hear about the medical check at 9 a.m. Monday morning. I had an appointment scheduled, Dolores said. Her voice was steady, almost impressively steady. The performance was expensive now, costing her something visible in the tension of her jaw, but she was still maintaining it. Where's the confirmation? Flint said. Excuse me, appointment confirmation. If it was scheduled, there's a confirmation number. Where is it? The hollow was very quiet. Someone's porch light clicked on down the road. A second one. The neighbors were watching from behind curtains. The particular curiosity of a hollow town where everyone knows everyone's car and 156 motorcycles are parked on a residential street on a Saturday evening. Dolores said nothing. Thought so, Flint said and stepped back. Graves moved next. Nathan Graves, 39, who had spent the past 90 minutes inside 29 Millbrook Hollow Road with 2 county sheriff's deputies. The deputies had arrived at 5:04 p.m. on the strength of Steele's call. Dale Steele, 24 years with the county sheriff's department, had the kind of professional reputation that meant when he called and said a house needed entering, the house got entered. Graves was not a theatrical person. He documented things. He photographed things. He presented what he found the way an accountant presents a balance sheet, without inflection, in order, letting the numbers speak because the numbers did not need help. Bedroom, he said. He turned his phone toward Dolores. The photograph showed the back bedroom of 29 Millbrook Hollow Road, 10 feet by 9, 1 mattress on the floor, 1 blanket, a coloring book with 4 crayons, a deadbolt mounted on the outside of the door, a window with 2 nails driven through the frame at angles that prevented it from opening more than 2 inches. That's for safety, Dolores said. Her voice was faster now, the reasonable tone beginning to crack at its edges like paint in cold weather. They sleepwalk, both of them. Installed within 48 hours of taking guardianship, Graves said. According to the hardware store clerk who sold you the bolt, he remembers you because you bought 3 extra screws and he helped you carry them to your car. He swiped to the next photograph. Kitchen, keyed deadbolt exterior only. Girls cannot access the kitchen independently. He swiped again. Financial records. Subpoena has already been filed. He held the phone so Dolores could see a text message screenshot. This was provided voluntarily by Brenda Tate 40 minutes ago. $3,420 in personal spending since March 8th. Living room furniture, a weekend in Lexington, a church gala outfit purchased the same day the Social Security payment arrived. He put his phone away. In the same 11 days, you fed 2 children 1 meal per day. The name Brenda Tate landed like a stone dropped in still water. Dolores's face changed, not the expression. Something behind it, something structural. The particular change that happens when a person realizes that the network they relied on has shifted, that the people who knew and said nothing have begun saying something, that the silence they had counted on has broken. Brenda Tate, 41 of Harlan, Kentucky, Dolores's closest friend for 9 years, the woman who had been on the other end of the phone call that Lily had memorized and transcribed in brown crayon. Brenda had broken in approximately 7 minutes when Hawk sat down across from her at her kitchen table. She had not needed much pressure. That was the thing about people like Brenda, the ones who told themselves they were not doing anything wrong. They broke fast because the guilt was already there sitting on their chest like a stone, and all they needed was someone to give them permission to move it. Hawk had simply opened the door. She told me the first week, Brenda had said, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she was not drinking, about the Social Security payments. I told her, I said, Dolores, are you sure about this? And she said it was her right as the guardian. Brenda had looked at the table, at the coffee, at her own hands. I didn't know about the food. I didn't know they were being locked in. I thought she was managing things. Did she tell you about the petition? Hawk had said. Yes. Brenda's voice had been very small, The voice of a woman who had been carrying something for 11 days and had just set it down and was discovering that setting it down was harder than carrying it. She said she was going to keep them for the long term. She said Annie was unfit. She said Brenda had looked up. Annie's not unfit. Annie had one charge. Dolores told the court. Dolores told everyone. But I knew what Annie was like before the arrest. She stopped. And I said nothing. Her voice broke on the last word. I said nothing. Hawk had stood up. He had looked at her steadily, without judgment, without anger, with the particular expression of a man who has learned that most people who do the wrong thing know it is the wrong thing and are waiting for someone to tell them they can stop. You're going to write down everything Dolores told you, he said, and you're going to sign it tonight. Brenda had nodded. She was already reaching for a notepad. Back on Millbrook Hollow Road, Mrs. Pauline Hargrove, 67, had been watching from her kitchen window since the bikes arrived. When Birch came to her door and knocked, she opened it immediately. Walt Birch, 69 years old, club elder, a man who had driven hollow roads in 1987 to help a family nobody else would touch, and who had been driving them ever since. He had the particular authority of a man who has been doing the right thing for so long that the right thing has become indistinguishable from who he is. I knew, Pauline Hargrove said before he had said more than his name. I knew on day 4 when Lily told me through the fence. I told Dolores, and Dolores said they were dramatic, and she stopped. I brought a casserole. I thought I'd helped. She shook her head. The particular grief of a woman who had spent 8 days negotiating with herself was in every line of her face. The daily arithmetic of telling yourself there was probably a reason. Of looking at a nailed-shut window and constructing an explanation that allowed you to go back inside and eat dinner. I watched that bedroom window every single day after that. I saw it was nailed shut, and I told myself there was probably a reason. Children sleepwalk. Maybe she had a reason. Birch sat with her on the porch in the cold. He did not rush her. He did not let her collapse into self-recrimination, which would have been easy and would have served no one. Self-recrimination is comfortable. It lets you feel the weight of your failure without requiring you to do anything about it. Reporting it tonight still counts, he said. Pauline Hargrove looked at him. It counts, he said again. Make the call. She went inside for her phone. Pastor William Dorsey, 58, First Baptist of Harlan, arrived at the scene at 5:47 p.m. He had seen the bikes from the church parking lot and come to investigate with the particular urgency of a man who suspects that something happening on a nearby street is connected to something he should have done differently a long time ago. Flint told him, in the parking lot of his own church, with specificity and without softness. About Dolores Whitfield's current situation, about the girls, about the locked room, about the Social Security payments, about the 11 days of one meal a day. And then Flint told him about Ruth Ellen Whitfield, Dolores's mother, who had died in Dolores's care in November of 2020, who had told him directly during a pastoral visit 3 words that should have changed everything. I feel like a prisoner. Pastor Dorsey stood with that information for a long moment. He was not a bad man. Garrett would say that later and mean it. William Dorsey was not a bad man. He was a man who had chosen institutional comfort over difficult truth, who had heard 3 words from an elderly woman in his congregation and had classified them as a spiritual complaint rather than a literal report, who had prayed with her and left. Because praying was what he knew how to do. And the other thing, the hard thing, the thing that required him to pick up a phone and say something that could not be taken back, that thing he did not know how to do. So he did what he knew. She said it to me in those words, the pastor said. He was not asking for confirmation. He was remembering. Standing in the parking lot of his church in the falling dark, watching 156 men stand in a road that was visible through the trees, and remembering a conversation from 5.5 years ago that he had filed away under pastoral concern and never opened again. I feel like a prisoner. I prayed with her. I left. You did, Flint said. Ruth died 6 weeks later. She did. The pastor looked at the road, at the formation, at Dolores still standing by her car with her committee folder pressed to her chest and her reading glasses on the performance of reasonable inconvenience getting harder to sustain as each piece of documentation emerged, as each witness came forward, as the architecture of plausibility she had built crumbled brick by brick. What can I do, Dorsey said. Not what do you need from me, not what are my obligations. What can I do? The question of a man who understands he is late and intends to be useful anyway. The question of a man who has had 6 years of quiet to think about 3 words from a dying woman and is not going to waste the chance to act on them now. Write down what Ruth told you, Flint said. Date, her exact words, your response. Signed. He paused. And when this goes to family court Monday morning, your presence will matter. Dorsey nodded. He pulled out his phone and began typing before he had walked back to the church. Dolores Whitfield's last stand came at 6:14 p.m. when the county sheriff's deputies moved toward her car. She saw them coming and something shifted in her posture. The committee folder lowering, the reading glasses coming off, her weight redistributing in the way of a person recalculating. The charm offensive came first. Her shoulders dropped, her palms opened. She produced a short, slightly self-deprecating exhale, the sound of someone who has decided that humor might diffuse the room. Look, I know how this looks, but I am the responsible adult in this situation. I have been managing 2 traumatized children under genuinely difficult circumstances, and I think if anyone actually takes the time to review my records rather than listening to, she gestured toward the coloring book pages Graves had photographed, crayon drawings from a 5-year-old. Which 5-year-old transcribed a phone call you made from your kitchen? Garrett said. The one about $1,588 a month. The one about being a fool not to fight for it. Dolores looked at him. Her palms were still open, her head still tilted, but something behind the expression had gone very careful. The way an animal goes careful when it realizes the ground has shifted. I want to call my attorney, she said. You're welcome to, Garrett said. The FBI is going to want to talk to them anyway. The word landed the way it was meant to. The FBI. Not the county sheriff, not the family court. The federal vel, which meant the scope had already grown past what Dolores had calculated for. Her open palms closed. The legal threat came next because charm had not worked. You are interfering with a court-appointed guardianship, she said, and the martyred exhaustion was gone from her voice, now replaced with something harder. The steel beneath the performance. The real Dolores, the calculating Dolores, the Dolores who had locked a deadbolt from the outside and driven to a church meeting. Every person on this street is liable for harassment and civil trespass. I have a relationship with the county judge. Judge Patricia Whitmore, Flint said. She's been notified. She's reviewing the petition suspension request tonight. He looked at Dolores steadily. Your relationship with her is one of the things she'd like to discuss. The legal threat ran out of road. What came next was the appeal to sympathy, which Dolores delivered with the particular fluency of a woman who had been building this version of herself for years. The sacrifice of taking in her sister's children, the stress she had been under, the thanklessness of being the responsible one in a family full of people who could not manage their own lives. She had given up her time, her privacy, her routines. And this was the gratitude she received. Dolores, Garrett's voice was quiet, 8 words. I'm not interested in your reasons. Neither are they. Something happened then. Not dramatic, not a collapse. The performance just stopped. All 4 phases run in order. Charm, legal threat, sympathy had failed. And Dolores Whitfield stood in the road in front of her own house with her reading glasses in her hand and her committee folder at her side and nothing left to reach for. Her hands, which had been open, closed. I was careful, she said quietly, to no one in particular. I was so careful. The 2 deputies reached her car. When they placed her hands behind her back, Dolores Whitfield was not wild-eyed or defiant. She was not spitting threats. She asked once quietly whether someone could call her neighbor about her mail. She would be gone for an uncertain period, and she did not want it piling up on the step. As if that were the thing that needed handling. As if the world she had built and the world she had nearly taken from 2 5-year-olds could wait while she sorted out her correspondence. The deputies charged her that night. Unlawful imprisonment of a minor, 2 counts, felony child endangerment, fraud upon a state court, financial exploitation of a minor. The bail hearing was set for Monday. The neighbors on Millbrook Hollow Road had come out of their houses by then. Not all of them, but enough. They stood on their porches in the cold evening air and watched the patrol car pull away from the curb with Dolores Whitfield in the back seat, her reading glasses still on her committee folder, left on the hood of her own car where she had set it when the deputies moved her hands behind her back. The folder sat there in the dark, its pages ruffling slightly in the wind that came through the gap in the ridgeline, and nobody picked it up. The brothers began to disperse, not all at once, in groups of 4 and 5 the way they had come. Engines turning over in sequence, headlights cutting through the dark, the particular orderly departure of men who understand that the work is not finished, but this particular phase of it is. Hawk was the last to leave the road. He stood at the spot where Dolores's car had stopped and looked at the house at 29 Millbrook Hollow Road for a long moment. The porch light was still off. The curtains were still drawn. The house looked the same as it had looked for 11 days, ordinary, enclosed, and unremarkable, the kind of house you drive past 1,000 times without wondering what is happening inside. That was the thing about houses like that. They looked like every other house on the street. The cruelty was not visible from the road. It never was. But the night was not over. The worst was not behind them. Garrett had thought it was. He was wrong. The chapter's war room that night was the back room of Garrett's repair shop on Clover Street, the only space in the county large enough for the brothers who needed to be there, private enough for what they were about to find out. Oil-stained workbench, fluorescent lights, the smell of motor oil and cold coffee, and the particular charged air of men who have been moving on adrenaline for 4 hours and have not yet come down. Hawk sat at the head of the workbench. Flint had his laptop open. Graves had the manila envelope he had found in Dolores's filing cabinet. Birch came in from the cold at 8:17 p.m., stamped his boots, and took a chair. Cutler was already there. Steele arrived 6 minutes later. Graves laid the documents out on the workbench in the order he had found them. "Layer 1, he said. He turned the first document toward the room. A bank statement. Dolores Whitfield's personal account going back 14 months. Flint leaned forward. He tracked the columns with one finger, and as he tracked, his expression changed in the specific way of a man who recognizes a pattern he has seen before. The way a doctor recognizes a symptom. The way a mechanic recognizes a sound. "Look at the deposit dates," Flint said. 15th of every month. 14 months of Social Security payments. He looked up, but they started 14 months ago, not 11 days ago. The room was quiet. The refrigerator in the break room hummed. Outside, a motorcycle idled somewhere on Clover Street and cut off. "Who were they for 14 months ago?" Flint said. "Layer 2, Graves said. He turned the second document. A guardianship filing, not for Lillian Rose Mercer, a different name entirely. Sophie Prescott, age 7, County Family Court, filed 14 months ago. Dolores Whitfield listed as emergency guardian following the mother's hospitalization for a psychiatric episode. The same pattern. Emergency placement, petition to extend, block the mother's return, collect the payments. The payments ended 9 months ago," Flint said, running the numbers with the specific focus of a man for whom numbers are not abstract, but are the signatures of decisions, which means the guardianship ended 9 months ago. What happened at the 9-month mark? Graves turned the third document, a court filing, a motion to terminate guardianship filed by a public defender on behalf of Sophie Prescott's mother, Carrie Prescott, who had been discharged from inpatient care and was petitioning to reclaim custody of her daughter. The motion had been successful. The guardianship had ended. The Social Security payments had stopped. And Dolores Whitfield, who had built her calculation around those payments, had needed a new source. Dolores was named guardian for someone else's child before Lillian Rose, Steele said, and fought to keep her, Flint said. Same pattern. Emergency placement petition to extend, block the mother's return. It just didn't work the second time because Carrie Prescott had a decent public defender and the judge wasn't Dolores's judge. He sat back. Lillian Rose were the third attempt. Layer 3, Graves said. He placed the last document on the workbench. It was older. The paper had a different weight, slightly yellowed at the edges, the particular aging of paper that has been in a drawer for years. A death certificate. Ruth Ellen Whitfield, November 14th, 2020. Cause of death, cardiac failure, secondary to malnutrition and dehydration. Age 74. Beneath it was an insurance policy. The beneficiary line read Dolores June Whitfield. The policy had been changed to sole beneficiary 6 months before Ruth's death. Amended from an equal split with Annie Mercer, Ruth's other daughter. The payout amount was printed clearly in the policy summary, $87,000. Ruth had told her pastor she felt like a prisoner. The pastor had prayed with her and left. 6 weeks later, Ruth Whitfield was dead of malnutrition and dehydration in the care of her own daughter. Nobody in the room spoke for a long moment. The fluorescent lights hummed. The refrigerator cycled. Outside, the hollow was dark and still. This was the part that would sit heaviest with Garrett later. Not Dolores. The villain was easy to understand. Someone who had made a calculation and run it 3 times. Someone who had looked at vulnerability, whether it came in the form of an aging mother, or a 7-year-old girl, or twin 5-year-olds, and had seen not a person to protect, but a revenue stream to capture. That was monstrous, but it was comprehensible. Monsters have a logic. You can trace the logic and understand the monster even if you cannot forgive her. What sat heavy was the system that had watched her do it. The family court that had taken Dolores's word on paper and not followed up. The 72-hour medical check that existed as a requirement and got skipped without consequence. The pastor who heard the words, "I feel like a prisoner," from an elderly woman in his congregation and classified it as a spiritual complaint rather than a literal report. The neighbor who saw a nailed-shut window and told herself there was probably a reason. Nobody had built these systems to be cruel. The family court judges were not villains. The social workers were not indifferent. The requirements existed because someone at some point had understood that children in emergency placements needed protection and had written that understanding into law. But the spaces between the requirements, the assumption that guardians could be trusted to self-report, the reliance on voluntary compliance, the 14-day follow-up window that gave a predator 2 weeks of unchecked access, those spaces had cost Ruth Whitfield her life. And they had come within 19 days of costing Lily and Rose Mercer their mother. She started with her mother, Hawk said finally. His voice was very level. Her own mother, Cutler said. Same signature, Flint said. He tapped the documents in sequence. Bank statements, guardianship filing, death certificate, insurance policy. Financial target, isolation of the dependent, control of all outside contact. False reporting to authorities. Petition strategy, deliberate neglect. He looked around the room. Ruth Whitfield, then Sophie Prescott, then Lily and Rose Mercer. 3 times, we caught her on the 3rd. Nobody spoke for Ruth, Birch said. The room held that, the weight of it. A woman who had told her pastor she felt like a prisoner and had watched him pray and leave. Who had found the words and said them to someone whose job was to hear hard things. And who had died 6 weeks later alone in a house with a deadbolt on the outside of her bedroom door. Nobody spoke for the Prescott girl either, Steele said quietly. 9 months of this, and she got out because her mother happened to find a public defender who knew how to file the right motion. Flint closed his laptop. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then at the table. This is federal, he said. Social Security fraud across multiple guardianship cases. Elder financial abuse on the insurance payout. Prior fraud charges on Ruth's estate if the transfer can be contested as coerced. He paused. The FBI has jurisdiction on the SSA fraud alone. So we make the call, Hawk said. We make the call, Flint confirmed. Special Agent Dana Calloway arrived at Garrett's repair shop at 9:31 p.m. Plain clothes, dark jacket, practical shoes, the face of a woman who had been working a case for longer than she wanted to admit and had driven from Lexington in a little over 2 hours, which meant she had been in the car within minutes of the call. She introduced herself. Name and office, 2 sentences. I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation, she said. Depends on what you're investigating, Garrett said. A pause. Agent Calloway's eyes moved across the room. The brothers at the workbench. The documents laid out in order. The manila envelope. Dolores June Whitfield, she said. In a pattern of fraudulent Social Security claims connected to emergency guardianship filings in eastern Kentucky. Garrett looked at Hawk. A decision passed between them without words. Then Garrett stepped back from the workbench. How long has your office known about her? Agent Calloway's expression did not change, but something in it settled. The particular settling of a person who has been carrying a case for months and has just realized she is standing in a room full of people who have done in 4 hours what her office had not done in 9 months. We identified the SSA pattern on the Prescott case 9 months ago. We've been building the financial trail to meet the legal evidentiary standard. We needed an original document, something physical that connected Dolores directly to deliberate neglect, not just financial fraud. She paused. The financial trail is solid. We didn't have the human evidence. We got her out in 4 hours, Garrett said. You had 9 months. The agent had no good answer to that. She did not pretend she did. She let the statement sit in the room, which was the right response, the honest response. Because the truth was that federal investigations move at federal speed, and the gap between federal speed and the speed at which a child goes hungry is the gap that nearly cost Lily and Rose Mercer everything. Garrett turned to the workbench. He placed the documents from Graves's envelope one at a time. The bank statements, the Prescott guardianship filing, the insurance policy, the death certificate for Ruth Whitfield. Then he placed both pieces of coloring book paper still in their evidence sleeves. Then Graves set a small speaker on the table and played a 40-second audio recording. The recording that Flint had been able to pull from the deleted files of Dolores's own phone recovered with a forensic tool Graves had on his laptop. Dolores's voice clear and matter-of-fact, the voice of a woman discussing a business transaction. $1,588 a month, Brenda. Tax-free. I'd be a fool not to fight for it. Agent Calloway had been writing when the audio started. She stopped writing. She set her pen down. The Prescott case only had financial records, she said. We didn't have audio. We didn't have a prior victim pattern documented in Dolores's own filing cabinet. She looked at the death certificate for Ruth. We certainly didn't have this. What does it change? Hawk said. Scope, she said. The SSA fraud charges stand alone on the financial evidence, but with the documented pattern across 3 victims, elderly parent, a minor. 2 minors the prior death, the audio. She paused. This moves from financial fraud to a federal pattern of predatory exploitation. The charges changed significantly. One condition, Garrett said. Agent Calloway looked at him. Annie Mercer gets a victim advocate assigned before any interview of her daughters. Nobody talks to Lily and Rose without them deciding they want to talk first. The agent looked at him steadily. We can do that. And the counter motion to Dolores's guardianship petition stays in front of family court Monday morning, regardless of the federal timeline. Annie's hearing doesn't get delayed for federal paperwork. That's 2 conditions, Agent Calloway said. It is, Garrett agreed. A beat, then agreed on both. She picked up her pen. She gathered the copies she had been permitted to make and moved toward the door. Agent Calloway, she turned. You do right by them, Garrett said. That's the job, she said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and walked out into the Harlan night. The scope when Flint laid it out for the county prosecutor the following morning was specific and complete. 3 victims. Ruth Ellen Whitfield, deceased age 74, whose estate had been drained of $87,000 in the months before her death, under conditions consistent with deliberate neglect. Sophie Prescott, age 7 at time of guardianship, now 8, 9 months of unlawful confinement and food restriction before her mother successfully contested the placement. Lily Louise Mercer and Rose June Mercer, age 5, 11 days. The Social Security fraud alone represented $1,588 per month across 2 separate guardianship cases with a projected fraudulent long-term gain on the Mercer girls of $247,000 had the permanent guardianship been granted. The charges filed against Dolores June Whitfield: unlawful imprisonment of a minor 2 counts, felony child endangerment 2 counts, Social Security fraud, fraud upon a state court, financial exploitation of a minor, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in connection with Ruth Whitfield's estate transfer. Bail was set at $340,000. The county detention center held 2 people that Sunday morning who shared a connection to the same family in separate wings of the same building. One of them was going home, the other was not. Annie Mercer walked out of the county detention center at 11:47 a.m. on Sunday, March 20th, into a gray Kentucky morning that smelled of cold mud and coming rain. She was 27 years old. She had been in that building for 11 days. She had called her daughters 9 times and heard nothing. She had spent 11 nights not knowing whether they were eating or sleeping or safe. She had lain on a thin mattress in a shared cell and stared at the ceiling and counted the hours and tried to hold her mind together around the simple, terrible arithmetic of not knowing. A single count of drug possession. First offense, 60-day sentence. She had served 11 days. The emergency release order had been filed at 7:04 p.m., the night before the same moment Dolores's guardianship petition was suspended on the basis of the social services review triggered by the evidence Flint had placed before the court. The prosecutor had reviewed Annie's file overnight. 1 charge. No prior record. A stable housing history before the arrest. 2 daughters who needed their mother. The order came through at 6:18 a.m. Steele was in the parking lot when she came out. He was leaning against his bike, arms crossed. Not because he was performing patience, but because he had learned in 24 years of law enforcement that the right thing to do when someone walks out of a building like that is to let them see your face first and figure out the rest at their own pace. Do not rush toward them. Do not crowd the moment. Just stand where they can find you and let the distance between you be theirs to close. Annie saw him. She stopped on the steps. The morning air was cold on her face after 11 days of recycled air and fluorescent lights. The sky was overcast but bright in the particular way of a Kentucky morning when the clouds are thin enough to let the light through without letting the sun through, and everything has the quality of a photograph that has been slightly overexposed. Your girls are at First Baptist, Steele said. June Dillard has been with them since last night. Cutler checked them out this morning. Both of them fine, eating. He paused, the kind of pause a man gives when the next sentence is the one that matters. Lily wanted me to tell you she found a good door. Annie pressed her hand over her mouth. She stood on those steps for a full 30 seconds, and she did not try to hide any of it. The tears came the way tears come when you have been holding them for 11 days, and the holding is suddenly over. And the body does what the body does without asking permission. She stood there in the gray Kentucky morning and let 11 days of not knowing come out of her in the particular silence of a woman whose grief is turning in real time into something else. Then she came down the steps and got on the back of a motorcycle for the first time in her life. Steele handed her a helmet without comment. She put it on. He started the engine. And they rode through the streets of Harlan, past the courthouse, past the diner on Mound Street, past the hardware store where Dolores had bought the deadbolt and the extra screws, past all of it, toward First Baptist Church where two 5-year-old girls were waiting in a food pantry back room for a door to open. The ride took 7 minutes. Annie held onto the back of the seat with both hands and watched the town go by through the visor of a helmet that smelled like leather and road dust and the particular metallic scent of a life lived on 2 wheels. She had never been on a motorcycle before. She had never imagined that the first time would be like this, riding through a town that had failed her daughters and then caught them holding on with the grip of a woman who has been holding on for 11 days and is not going to stop now. Steele pulled into the First Baptist parking lot and cut the engine. He did not say anything. He just sat there and let Annie take the helmet off at her own pace. She sat on the back of the bike for a moment, looking at the church, at the back door of the food pantry, at the building where her daughters had been found by a man with reading glasses and oil-stained hands who had picked up a note from the floor instead of stepping over it. She got off the bike. She walked to the door. June Dillard opened it before she knocked. The reunion happened in that same room. The room where Garrett had opened the door 20 hours earlier. The room that smelled of canned goods and old wood. The room with the heating unit that ticked in the corner and the shelves that held donated food from families who could not always afford to give it, but gave it anyway. It was not a scene that belonged to anyone watching. It belonged to the 3 of them, Annie, Lily, Rose. The door closed. What happened inside that room was not something anyone outside it had any business describing. What can be said is this: when the door opened again 40 minutes later, all 3 Mercers walked out holding hands. Lily on Annie's right, Rose on her left. Rose still had Garrett's riding jacket around her shoulders, which she had declined to return on the grounds that it was warm, and she was not done with it yet. Nobody argued with her. There are some arguments you do not win against a 5-year-old who has been through what Rose Mercer had been through, and the disposition of a leather riding jacket was one of them. The medical visit happened Monday morning. Cutler drove them to the county hospital at 8:45 a.m., which meant he had been in the parking lot of the shelter at 8:15 with a bag of breakfast sandwiches in the particular manner of a man who had thought ahead without making a production of it. He sat in the waiting room while Annie took the girls in, and he had brought a children's book he had bought at the gas station, which Lily read to Rose in the waiting room chairs with the focused seriousness of a child who takes reading very seriously and considers it her duty to share the experience with her sister. The pediatrician was a woman named Dr. Carol Avery, who had been practicing in the county for 19 years and had the manner of someone who has seen a great deal and maintained her care through all of it. She examined both girls. She reviewed Cutler's weight assessment from Saturday. She looked at the documented medical history, or the absence of it. 11 days without the mandatory check, which was its own kind of document. When she came out to the waiting room, she looked at Cutler directly. "Thank you for getting them here when you did," she said quietly, "without performance." Cutler nodded. He did not say anything. "Some thanks you just received." The girls were 6 pounds underweight, each consistent with 11 days of deliberate caloric restriction. No lasting physical damage, Dr. Avery reported, provided nutrition was properly restored. She provided a specific refeeding plan. Not just more food, but particular foods in particular amounts, because a body that has been restricted needs to come back carefully. She printed the plan and handed it to Annie, then looked at her steadily. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "Working on it," Annie said. "We have it," Cutler said from across the room. The housing solution came from a woman named Gloria Beckett, 61, who had lived on Cedar Gap Road for 32 years. She owned the house next door to her own, a two-bedroom rental that had sat empty since October. She had heard what happened on Millbrook Hollow Road. She had called First Baptist on Sunday morning. The chapter raised $11,400 in 48 hours. Donations from all four chapters that had ridden Saturday, plus a national chapter response that Hawk had quietly put out Sunday afternoon. The amount covered 6 months of rent, the utility deposits, and a grocery run that Birch and his wife organized with the particular logistical efficiency of people who know how to feed a family from a standing start. The right canned goods, the right fresh produce, the right proportions for two 5-year-olds who needed to gain 6 pounds each without being overwhelmed by abundance after scarcity. Annie, Lily, and Rose moved into the Cedar Gap house on Tuesday afternoon, 2 days after Dolores Whitfield's arrest. The house was small and clean and had the particular plainness of a place that had been waiting for someone to need it. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window above the sink that looked out on Gloria Beckett's garden next door, where the first green things of spring were beginning to push through the cold soil, a living room with wood floors that creaked in the spots where the joists had settled over 30 years. Graves carried the last box in. It was not a heavy box. It contained the few possessions Annie had managed to gather from their old rental clothes, mostly some books, the girls' school supplies that had never been used because Dolores had never enrolled them. The box was light, and that was its own kind of statement, the material weight of a family's life reduced to something one man could carry with one hand. He handed Annie the key, an ordinary house key on a plain ring, and said, "You need anything, you call Garrett." Annie looked at the key in her hand for a moment. She turned it over once. It was a small thing, a piece of cut metal on a ring, the kind of object you carry without thinking about it. But Annie held it the way you hold something you have been given back after believing it was lost. Because a key is not just a key when you have spent 11 days knowing that someone else held all the keys and all the locks and all the decisions about when doors open and when they stayed shut. Then she looked around the kitchen. Small, clean. The counters were bare. The walls were white. The afternoon light came through the window above the sink and made a rectangle on the linoleum floor. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, empty, but running, waiting to be filled. "There's a cat," she said. "Muffin. We left her at the old place when—" She stopped. Graves said nothing. He just pulled out his phone and texted someone. Muffin arrived that evening carried in a borrowed cat carrier by a 16-year-old kid from the chapter's youth volunteer program who had been delegated to retrieve her from Annie's old rental. The cat was orange and deeply unimpressed by the journey. She walked directly to the center of the living room, sat down, and began grooming herself as if she had always lived there, and could not understand why everyone else was making such a fuss about the obvious. Rose sat cross-legged on the floor 2 feet away and watched her with an expression of pure, uncomplicated happiness. The kind of happiness that does not need context or explanation. The kind that exists entirely in the present moment between a 5-year-old girl and an orange cat in a living room that already feels like home. Garrett, who had stopped by with the rest of the canned goods from his donation boxes, stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Rose watch the cat. He would carry that image for a very long time. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. Because ordinary was the thing these girls had been denied for 11 days, and ordinary was what they deserved. And ordinary when you have been locked in a room and fed once a day and told that nobody is coming, ordinary is the most extraordinary thing in the world. On Wednesday morning, Flint sat across from County Family Court Judge Patricia Whitmore and walked her through every document in order. He had done this hundreds of times in 18 years, and the ritual of it had not lost its weight. The careful placement of evidence, the deliberate pace, the moment when a judge's expression shifted from professional attention to something more personal. The mandatory 72-hour medical check, Judge Whitmore said, was not completed. It was not completed, Flint confirmed, and no follow-up was triggered. The judge looked at the file. "My office approved the emergency order, and sent the standard check requirement. When you didn't receive confirmation, the case entered a queue, Flint said. Not accusatory, factual. The standard follow-up window is 14 days. We were at day 11. The system worked exactly as designed. He paused. The design has a gap. Judge Whitmore was quiet for a moment. It does, she said. Dolores's lawyer had prepared a counterargument. The evidence had been gathered through what he characterized as an illegal search conducted at the behest of a motorcycle club with no legal standing. The coloring book notes were the hearsay of traumatized children. The bank records had been obtained before the subpoena was formalized. Flint had anticipated every point. The search had been conducted by county sheriff's deputies with a warrant issued by a sitting judge. The coloring book notes were physical evidence, not hearsay produced by the children themselves without adult coaching. The bank records had been voluntarily provided by a witness, Brenda Tate, prior to the subpoena, which made them admissible under a separate evidentiary standard. The lawyer objected to the scope. Flint presented the scope. The lawyer requested a continuance. Judge Whitmore denied it. Lily and Rose Mercer were formally returned to Annie Mercer's legal custody at 10:34 a.m. Wednesday. The emergency guardianship was terminated. The petition to extend was not merely suspended, it was expunged from the record on the basis that it had been filed fraudulently while the mandatory conditions of the original order were still unmet. The bail remained at $340,000. The hearing was over. Annie enrolled the girls at the elementary school on Thursday morning. She sat in the principal's office and filled out the paperwork and answered the questions. And when the principal, a man named Dale Comstock, 50 years old, who had been told by Flint what had happened, asked if there was anything the school could do to support the transition, Annie said, just treat them like kids. He did. Lily's teacher was a woman named Mrs. Barbara Lane, 43, who had been teaching in the county for 17 years and knew exactly how to make a child feel both seen and unremarkable, which is the specific skill required in that specific moment. She gave Lily a seat by the window. She did not ask her to introduce herself to the class. She simply showed her where the crayons were kept and let her get to work. Lily colored for the entire first morning. Animals, mostly horses. Long strokes of brown and chestnut and black, staying inside the lines with the focused precision of a child who takes her art seriously. On the back of one of them, before she handed it to Mrs. Lane at the end of the day, she wrote her name in large, careful letters. Lily Mercer. This is my school now. Mrs. Lane kept it on her desk for the rest of the year. The brothers said goodbye in the way brothers do, without ceremony and without lingering, each in their own manner. Cutler stopped by Cedar Gap Road Thursday evening with a thermometer and 2 children's vitamin bottles and a printed copy of Dr. Avery's refeeding plan with certain items circled. He handed them to Annie without preamble. Any questions about the plan, call me. Any concerns about either of them, call me first. He looked at both girls. You doing okay? Lily said yes, without looking up from her coloring book. Rose nodded seriously as though it were a medical assessment, and she intended to give an accurate report. Cutler nodded back. He left. Graves stopped by Friday morning. He gave Lily his phone number written on a card. Any time, he said. I mean it. He said it in the specific way of someone who means it exactly as stated, without asterisks or conditions or the implicit expiration date that most adult promises carry. Lily took the card and put it in the pocket of her hoodie, the pocket where she had carried the birthday cards. Birch was the last to stop by. Saturday morning, a week after everything. He brought groceries. Not the symbolic kind, the practical kind based on an actual list he had asked Annie for. He sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes and drank a cup of coffee and talked about nothing important. The weather, the hollow, the general state of the county in early spring. He did not ask how Annie was doing in the way that requires a performance of okayness. He just sat in her kitchen and was present without demanding anything from her. When he stood to leave, Rose came into the kitchen. She looked up at him. She had to tilt her head back to see his face because Walt Birch was 69 years old and tall, and she was 5 and small, and the angle between them was considerable. Thank you for talking to Mrs. Hargrove, she said. She had apparently been told about the porch conversation. Birch looked down at her. He had been writing these hollows since before her mother was born, and he had seen a great deal, and he was in this moment visibly moved by one small girl with brown eyes saying thank you for a thing he had done because it was right. She talked, he said. That's what mattered. Rose nodded as though this confirmed something she had already understood about the world and the people in it. 8 months later, Annie Mercer started her first shift as a family advocate at the County Family Resource Center. She had applied in September, 3 weeks before she started, after seeing a posting on the bulletin board at the elementary school when she had come in for Lily's parent-teacher conference. The resource center was a small operation, 2 advocates and a coordinator, a state-funded program that connected families navigating the court system with services support and someone who answered the phone when they called. The position paid $17.40 an hour and required no specific credential beyond lived experience with the system and the ability to sit with someone in a hard place without flinching. Annie had both. Her supervisor, a woman named Terry, interviewed her for 20 minutes and called Garrett for a reference without telling Annie she was going to. Garrett told Terry 3 things: that Annie's daughters were the most self-possessed children he had met at any age, that this tended to reflect something about the person who raised them, and that Annie Mercer would be the best hire the center had made. Terry offered her the position that afternoon. The first case Annie assisted with involved a grandmother in a neighboring county who had called the center because her daughter's guardianship petition filed while the mother was in a rehabilitation facility looked to this grandmother's eye wrong in ways she could not articulate. She had called 3 different offices before the resource center picked up. Annie read the petition. She recognized the pattern, not because she had studied it, because she had lived it. The emergency filing, the quick petition to extend, the blocked communication, the financial redirect. She called Flint. The petition was flagged for review by the following morning. It was the second time the pattern had been caught because of what happened in Harlan County in March. Flint added it to the case documentation he was building for a state-level policy review. The Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the same organization he had left in 2021 after a flagged case was buried, had called him in October. The Whitfield case had reached people who found it useful to have an 18-year veteran who knew where the gaps were. He went back on a consulting basis, on his terms. He told Garrett about it over coffee at the repair shop. "I thought I was done with them," he said. "Nobody's done," Garrett said. "No," Flint agreed, "nobody's done." The policy review Flint contributed to resulted in a proposed change to the emergency guardianship 72-hour medical check requirement in Kentucky, specifically a mandatory confirmation receipt that the court would have to process before the check window closed rather than relying on the guardian to self-report compliance. The change was still working its way through the legislative process, which moved the way legislative processes move, slowly and with friction, but it was moving. Cutler stopped by Cedar Gap Road in November, the week before Thanksgiving, with a turkey he had picked up at the church food drive and a note from Dr. Avery saying both girls were at healthy weight and developing normally. He handed Annie the note first, then the turkey. Annie looked at the note for a moment, then set it on the refrigerator under a magnet. "Tell Dr. Avery thank you," she said. "Tell her yourself," Cutler said. "Your next well-child visit is December 3rd. 3 years later, Lily Mercer was 8 years old, and in the 2nd grade at the elementary school, where she was known primarily for her reading speed, her opinions on every book she had ever encountered, and the fact that she was the most reliable person in her class in a crisis. The one who went to get the teacher when Marcus fell off the playground equipment. The one who sat with new kids on their first day until they looked less scared. She did this without thinking about it, which was the tell. Helping frightened people was not for Lily an act of courage. It was just what you did when you saw someone who needed it. The way breathing is not a decision, the way opening a door for someone carrying something heavy is not heroism. It is just what hands are for. On a Tuesday in October, a girl named Emma transferred into Lily's class from a county over. She was quiet in the particular way that had nothing to do with shyness. She sat at her desk with her hands folded and watched everything and spoke to no one and ate her lunch in very small bites in a manner that suggested she was not sure the food would last. Lily watched her for 2 days. On Wednesday afternoon during free reading time, Lily moved her chair to Emma's table without asking and sat down and opened her book. She did not introduce herself. She did not ask questions. She did not do any of the things that well-meaning children do when they are trying to include someone and end up making the someone feel more visible in exactly the way visibility hurts. She just sat there reading, close enough that Emma would know she was welcome without being made to perform acceptance. After about 15 minutes, Emma said quietly, "Why are you sitting here?" Lily looked up from her book. She considered the question with the seriousness she gave to most things. Because you look like you could use someone to sit with you, she said. Emma looked at her. She had brown eyes that were watchful in a specific way Lily recognized from the inside. The eyes of a child who is always calculating, always measuring the distance between herself and the door. My mom's in the hospital, Emma said. She said it the way you say something you have been carrying alone and have finally decided to set down. Not because you trust the person you are setting it in front of, but because the weight has become too heavy to keep holding and the floor will have to do. Okay, Lily said. She did not make a face. She did not say I'm sorry in the way that closes a conversation by wrapping it in sympathy and sealing it shut. She just accepted the information the way it had been offered, as a fact, not as a performance. Do you have someone to stay with? Emma nodded. My aunt. Lily looked at her for a moment. Is your aunt good? It was a direct question. The kind of question only someone who already knew what the answer could mean would think to ask. Is your aunt good did not mean is your aunt nice, or is your aunt fun, or does your aunt make cookies? It meant something much more specific asked in the particular language of a child who had learned at 5 years old that the adults who are supposed to take care of you are not always good, and that the question is not rude. The question is survival. Emma blinked. Something shifted in her face. Surprise first and then the careful recalibration of someone who has been asked the right question for the first time. Yeah, Emma said. She's good. She makes soup. Lily nodded. Okay, she said, and went back to her book. But she sat at Emma's table every day for the rest of the month. And when Emma's mom came out of the hospital, and Emma came to school one morning, looking like someone had put the lights back on behind her eyes, Lily looked up from her book and said, She's home. She's home, Emma said. Good, Lily said. And she meant it with her whole 8-year-old self. Garrett Holden drove out to Cedar Gap Road on a Sunday evening 3 weeks after the arrest. He had not planned to. He had been doing a generator repair for an elderly woman up on Ivy Gap, one of his jobs. The ones he did not advertise, the ones where the billing receipt said 0 in his own handwriting, because some things are not transactions. And Cedar Gap was on the way back. He sat in his truck in front of Gloria Beckett's rental house for a moment with the engine running. Through the front window, he could see the kitchen light on. Movement, Annie at the counter doing something ordinary, washing dishes maybe, or making dinner. The particular silhouette of a person performing an act so routine it has become invisible to them. And at the kitchen table, 2 small figures bent over what looked like coloring books. Elbows on the table, feet swinging. The particular posture of children who are concentrating and comfortable and safe. Muffin the cat was visible on the windowsill, just sitting there doing what cats do, which is to be exactly where they want to be, without apology or explanation. Garrett watched for about 90 seconds. He was not trying to be invisible. If Annie had looked up, she would have seen the truck. But nobody looked up. They were just inside their house on a Sunday evening, being a family, doing the ordinary things that ordinary families do when they are safe, when the doors did not lock from the outside, when the food is in the kitchen and the kitchen is not locked, when the windows open all the way and the only reason they are closed is because the evening is cold. He had been 9 years old once, watching through a window, hoping someone on the outside would look in and see him. Nobody had looked in for 3 years. He thought about the note. Help us, we're hungry. 7 words in brown crayon, the misspelling that had in the end been the most convincing proof that it was real. Because a child who was performing crisis would have spelled it correctly. A child who was actually hungry spelled it the way it sounded because she had never seen the word written and had to figure it out on her own in the dark. He thought about Lily's face when she had realized the door was opening. Not relief, not fear. The face of someone whose plan had worked, who had known all along what she was doing, who had tried 3 times and failed 3 times and had tried a 4th time anyway because giving up was not something she was willing to do. He put the truck in reverse and pulled out onto Cedar Gap Road. The hollow was dark on both sides. The particular March becoming April dark of eastern Kentucky when the dead leaves are finally giving way to something green in the gullies. And the air smells different, smells like mud and possibility, the smell of a world that has been cold for a long time and is remembering how to be warm. The temperature was 47 degrees, warm enough that it registered, warm enough to notice. He drove for a while without the radio on, just the sound of the engine and the tires on the road, and the particular silence of a man who is thinking about something he does not need to say out loud because he has already said it with 11 years of canned goods and $400 in a door that he opened when a piece of paper appeared on the floor. She wrote it down, he thought. She did not wait for someone to notice. She wrote it down and she slid it under and she left her shoes for her sister. And he had been 48 years old and had not done anything half that brave in recent memory. At the intersection where Clover Street met the main road, he stopped at the light and sat there for a moment in the running truck. The light was red, the road was empty. The sky had the particular quality of early spring darkness that is not quite as dark as winter darkness, that has a softness in it, a promise that the light is coming back even if it has not arrived yet. He reached into his vest pocket and took out his phone. He opened the folder he kept there labeled simply "Why We Ride" and added a line. He did this after every case. It had become the ritual that told him a case was complete and carried, that the weight of it had been picked up and put down in its proper place. The folder had 37 entries now. 37 names, 37 ages, 37 towns. Some of them he thought about often. Some of them had faded to the particular softness of old memory, still there but no longer sharp. All of them had changed the course of a life. All of them had started the same way, with someone noticing something and deciding not to look away. He typed Lily Mercer, age 5, Harlan County. She wrote it down. He looked at the words on the screen for a moment. Then he put the phone away. The light turned green. He drove home. The repair shop would be open in the morning. There would be generators to fix and mowers to service, and the ordinary work of a man who keeps other people's machines running because the work is honest and the work is needed. He would make coffee in the back room and open the bay doors and put on his reading glasses and read the first work order of the day. And on the third Saturday of next month, he would load 2 boxes of canned goods into his truck and drive to First Baptist Church and leave them at the food pantry back door the way he had done every third Saturday for 11 years, and he would check the floor before he left. He would always check the floor now. 1 year before all of this, Garrett Holden had driven through Harlan County on ordinary business. He had left 2 boxes at a food pantry door and almost walked back to his truck without looking down. He had been doing it for 11 years. The routine was the routine. Leave the boxes, leave the cows, leave without being seen. The same way he had done it every third Saturday of every month since the day he first opened his shop and decided that the neighbor who had made a call for a 9-year-old boy deserved to be repaid in the only currency that mattered. Doing for someone else what someone had done for you. He had almost walked back. Almost. The paper on the floor had been small and easy to miss. A folded piece of coloring book paper, not much bigger than his palm, resting against the toe of his work boot. He could have stepped over it. He could have assumed it was garbage, a child's drawing that had blown in under the door, the kind of thing you sweep up and throw away without a second thought. But he had picked it up, and 2 little girls who had been told by the world that nobody was coming found out that the world was wrong. The note is always there, on someone's floor, on someone's step, in someone's voice, in the way a child eats in small bites, or goes quiet in a particular way, or has brown eyes that watch everything and trust nothing. The note is there, written in crayon, or spoken in whispers, or visible in the space between what an adult says and what a child's face shows. All you have to do is pick it up.